King Crimson is easily one of the most insanely powerful stands in all of JoJo's. Okay, that's maybe not the best way to start the video since that's pretty much common knowledge to any fan of the series, but I feel like it's important to establish that baseline. There are very few stands in the entire series that I think would have a chance of beating King Crimson in a one-on-one fight, and in part 5 we saw Diavolo completely destroy everyone he fought against up until his fight against Gold Experience Requiem, which is, in my opinion, by far the strongest stand ever. And just as all JoJo's fans are in agreement that King Crimson is one of the strongest stands in the series, many fans seem to believe that it is also one of the most confusing and complex stands ever introduced. While I don't necessarily disagree with the notion that this stand's abilities can be quite confusing to comprehend, I think a lot of people take it way too far by implying that Araki is a bad writer who created a stand with inconsistent abilities. During my most recent rewatch of Golden Wind, I believe I gained a complete understanding of how King Crimson truly works, and I've now realized that the reason people view this stand as too confusing or inconsistent isn't due to Araki being a bad writer, but due to the fact that the stand is so incredibly broken that its potential is unfathomable. Over the course of this rewatch, I discovered one particular ability that King Crimson possesses, which essentially makes Diavolo the master of both time and fate. And this ability is the reason why a ridiculously powerful stand such as GER was necessary in order to defeat him for good. In this video, I'll be explaining why King Crimson is even more broken than you might think.
King Crimson の能力の中ではこの世の時間は消し飛び、そして全ての人間はこの時間の中で動いた足跡を覚えていない。空の雲はちぎれ飛んだことに気づかず、消えた炎は消えた瞬間を炎自身さえ認識しない。
So, as a refresher, let's quickly go over King Crimson's basic abilities. King Crimson is a close-range power stand that primarily attacks using its hands and arms. Its effective range is only about 2 meters, but we've seen on multiple occasions how physically powerful King Crimson's attacks are once its target is actually within this range. Diavolo chopped up Bucciarati more easily than a hibachi chef can chop up some fish, and he turned a Bakio into a 6'2" donut. King Crimson's ability to pierce through human flesh seems comparable to the power of the world's punches, although I do think the world possesses speed and precision that King Crimson wouldn't be close to matching. While King Crimson is easily one of the most impressive stands in terms of raw physical strength, that is nowhere near its most powerful ability. King Crimson's main power is the ability to skip or erase up to 10 seconds of time. Diavolo is the only person who is able to observe what occurs during that erased time, and once the time skip has ended, everyone other than Diavolo will have forgotten everything that occurred during that erased time. This ability is essentially a representation of one of the main themes and aspects of JoJo's, that being the ideas of fate and gravity. Throughout the series, it becomes very clear that the way things play out are how they were fated to happen, and King Crimson's ability is contingent on this concept. The idea of fate isn't just explored through Diavolo and King Crimson, by the way. Part 4 has a ton of references to this concept, and Pucci's entire plan in Part 6 is based on fate being a real thing. Anyways, Diavolo's only handicap is that he becomes intangible while erasing time. This is beneficial in the sense that he won't be injured by attacks that would have hit him otherwise, but he can't attack anyone while erasing time. To make up for this, Diavolo positions himself behind his enemies so that he can attack immediately after time resumes, and occasionally launches blood towards their eyes so that they'll be blinded after the time skip ends. The only way for a normal stand user to counter Diavolo is to look directly at something that would noticeably change after a time skip and then try to react to this attack as fast as possible. Polnareff uses drops of blood to do this, but I think it should be possible to observe the time erasure by using something as simple as a wristwatch. Of course, this counter doesn't really work if Diavolo blinds his opponent, which is why he's viewed as essentially invincible until the end of Part 5. Time erasure is pretty broken, but at least Diavolo can't predict the future, so he just has to make educated guesses about when the right moment to skip time is, right? Well, that's where his secondary ability, Epitaph, comes into play. Diavolo can see up to 10 seconds into the future using the projection cast by Epitaph, and these predictions are 100% accurate because Epitaph shows what events are fated to happen. Diavolo almost always projects Epitaph's predictions onto his bangs, but he's able to project these visions for others to see as well, which he does during his fight with Bucciarati. Of course, this ability is the perfect ability to be tied to King Crimson, and possessing both at the same time essentially makes Diavolo invincible once again. I've seen a lot of people say that Epitaph is actually Doppio's stance since Diavolo and Doppio are two separate souls sharing the same body, but I've always viewed this as King Crimson's sub-stand ability, similar to Killer Queen's sheer heart attack. I'm not saying those people are 100% wrong, by the way, I'm just presenting my own interpretation. The only time we've ever seen Epitaph's prediction be wrong is when Diavolo was fighting Giorno and GER, but that seems to be because GER's manipulation of time and fate just simply outclass and overrule Diavolo's ability to forecast the future. If you watch through Golden and win, then of course you would have already known about all of those abilities that I just explained. Maybe some of those are confusing and maybe there are lots of rules to wrap your head around, but I don't think those fundamental abilities are what really ends up confusing people in regards to King Crimson. What probably confuses people the most is when King Crimson's abilities don't seem to be completely consistent. I do believe that the Stan's abilities are consistent throughout the story, but there's one ability directly related to time erasure that is never explicitly shown to us, and ends up making King Crimson essentially invincible. Let me explain more clearly. So we know that Diavolo becomes intangible during time skip. Even though he often avoids attacks during these skips, such as when he fights Bucciarati, it's clear from the end of his fight against Risotto that attacks will simply phase through him if he erases time before they're meant to hit him. He likely just dodges attacks to create a cool visual effect for the manga. We also know that King Crimson cannot injure anyone while erasing time, and Diavolo has to work around this handicap in every single fight. So then how is a scene like this one possible?
登場だ。トリッシュ、トリ。
I don't think the anime does a good job of portraying a time skip happening here. The manga suggests it a little bit more, but we know one must have occurred since Trish disappears from the elevator without a sound or Bucciarati remembering it happening. But if a time skip did happen, like I'm suggesting, then how did intangible Diavolo possibly destroy the elevator ceiling, separate Trish from her hand, make it back out of the elevator ceiling, and then make it halfway down the elevator shaft? By the way, I know this is a complete tangent, but how is Bucciarati unable to make out a single distinguishable feature when he's looking at Diavolo here, but he can make out Trish's boobs in 4K? Bro, Diavolo dresses like a stripper and has strawberry yogurt for hair. How can you not see anything, my guy? Anyways, if it's not possible for Diavolo to interact with people or objects during time skip, then how was he able to do so during this scene? Some people might view this as a plot hole or Araki not fully deciding how King Crimson's abilities worked at this point in time, but I don't think that makes sense since King Crimson's abilities are laid out very clearly in the next few chapters as Diavolo fights Bucciarati. It also wouldn't make sense for this to be an inconsistency since there are multiple other times when Diavolo is seemingly able to interact with people or objects during time skip. This scene isn't a plot hole, but it does show us an example of the true extent of King Crimson's abilities. If Diavolo himself is fated to perform an action or set of actions during time skip, then without him actually needing to perform those actions himself, the results of those actions will remain once time skip has concluded. Whether Diavolo carries out these actions or not, the results that were fated to take place will be what remains once the time skip is complete. Now that probably wasn't the most clear explanation, so let me use this elevator scene as an example. Before the time skip, the elevator ceiling was intact, I think. I don't know if they actually showed the ceiling beforehand. And Trish was holding hands with Bucciarati and definitely wasn't in the middle of the elevator shaft. After the time skip, the ceiling had a hole in it and Trish was being taken down the elevator shaft by Diavolo. She was also missing one of her hands. I guess that's pretty important. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that both of these events would be direct results of Diavolo's actions, or at least the actions that he was fated to take. However, we can be pretty certain that a time skip occurred in this scene due to the fact that we don't hear any noise from the elevator ceiling being destroyed, we don't hear Trish scream or exclaim at all from the pain of having her hand chopped off, and Bucciarati doesn't initially notice that anything's happened. If Diavolo somehow pulled off all of that without erasing time, dude, that guy is in the wrong fictional universe. So here's what I think happened. Diavolo was hanging out near the elevator car, probably on top of it, although we're never shown. He checks out Epitaph and eventually he sees a time frame in which he is fated to enter the elevator car and take Trish by force. He then activates time skip, and without performing the actions himself, the results of his fated actions begin to take place in front of him. A hole is created in the elevator ceiling, Trish is detached from her hand and taken out of the elevator, and both of them end up partially down the elevator shaft by the time King Crimson's ability stops. I know, it sounds pretty crazy, but this is the only explanation that I think makes any sense given the limitations of King Crimson's powers, and also all of the other information I've laid out. The only problem I can see is that if Diavolo was fated to enter the elevator and take Trish, then Bucciarati should have been fated to notice and begin attacking him. Of course, Diavolo wouldn't be hurt by this during time erasure, and Bucciarati wouldn't have any memory of the time that was skipped over, but Bucciarati probably should have been facing the hole in the ceiling instead of looking the opposite way. Maybe this is up to interpretation though. It's possible that Diavolo using time skip was itself part of fate, and Bucciarati was fated to not notice what was going on around him due to that fact. Man, this is way too confusing. I'm not getting paid enough to rack my brains like this. You might be wondering, if Diavolo isn't performing these actions himself, then what force is possibly causing all of these events to occur? I feel like I can make a whole video on that question, but I think the best answer would be gravity. No, I'm not talking about Newton. Well, maybe I am. It's kind of weird. Gravity seems to have a complicated definition in the Jojo universe. It's the force that brings stand users together, it's what causes the stand arrows to be attracted to certain people, and it's also the physical phenomenon that Pucci needs to use in order to enact the Heaven Plan in Part 6, a plan which would allow everyone to know their fate entirely. I believe this concept of gravity is what's causing these fated events to take place without Diavolo needing to take action himself. This is just my own interpretation since we've never properly witnessed these events taking place, but I do think it's the most reasonable conclusion based on all the evidence that's scattered throughout the series. This force causes these actions to be carried out because they are what is fated to happen, and so they will happen whether Diavolo erases time or not. King Crimson erases the cause while leaving the results intact. I did say that this elevator sequence isn't the only example of gravity carrying out Diavolo's fated actions during the time skip, so let's look at two other important ones. I've seen some people be confused about Diavolo cleaning up the room after the cleaning lady comes in and sees him, but I think this is the same thing. Of course, his fated actions after the lady comes in were to clean up the room and get out of there as fast as possible, but he used time skip so that the cleaning lady wouldn't be able to remember that moment. Narancia's death is the same idea. At first, I was really confused about how Diavolo would have killed him without everyone else noticing, but it must have been gravity and fate that caused Narancia to become impaled on those poles and for the gate to break in the first place. Is it a pretty insane death that maybe still doesn't make too much sense? Yeah, probably, but it's just Narancia, so whatever. My only question is, why doesn't Diavolo just spam this ability in order to fight his enemies? Usually he just positions himself behind people when they're fighting and tries to attack them as soon as time skip stops. But if, like when he killed Narancia, he just saw in Epitaph that he's fated to defeat this person, would they simply be defeated after the time skip without Diavolo even needing to attack them? It sounds pretty ridiculous, but I think it should be completely possible considering we've seen him defeat Narancia in this way, and we've also seen Trish's hand be severed when Diavolo should be intangible and in the middle of a time skip. Considering it should be possible to instantly win if Epitaph forecasts it, then I really don't know how you can possibly beat King Crimson without having a power that just completely overrules fate and time altogether. After taking all of its abilities into consideration, it's clear that King Crimson makes its user the master of both time and fate, and there are only a handful of stands that I think can face it at all. For the next 10 seconds at any given moment, Diavolo is the only person who knows exactly what is fated to happen, can change what events he is affected by, can benefit from the results of his own fated actions without actually having to perform them himself, and is the only one who will remember the events of these 10 seconds once they've concluded. This power is just so absurd, and even though Diavolo was presented as invincible in part 5, I had to make this video in order to make it clear that there's even more to King Crimson's powers than what was explained in the manga. Of course, GER beats King Crimson, D4C can outlast just about anything, Made in Heaven seems to be a hard counter to time-based abilities, and Wonder of You is just... I don't really know what to say there, but that's pretty much it. Tusk is probably more powerful, strictly speaking, but I honestly think it could be difficult for Johnny to hit Diavolo in the same way that it was difficult for him to hit alternate Diego. Again, Tusk might be the stronger stand, but the matchup would be very difficult. A lot of people might say that Star Platinum or the World could win. Again, I think they're more physically powerful, but I think King Crimson would be able to override Time Stop. I'm sure there's a debate to be had there, though. It's just insane how many possibilities come from Time Erasure, and I think it's by far one of the best abilities a stand could ever have. So I hope I've convinced you that King Crimson is even more broken than you originally thought. Some of this video was made up of my own interpretations and speculations about the stand and its abilities, so if you have your own thoughts or maybe disagree with mine, or maybe you know that mine are wrong, then feel free to let me know in the comments. I'm not making videos just to tell you that I'm right about everything and you're wrong about everything. I want to start a discussion. Let me know what other videos you want to see in the future. A new Hunter x Hunter video is in the works right now, so expect to see that super soon. And that's it for me. See you next time.